Hey, welcome to another episode of The Real Dirt with Chip Baker. Today, I have Dan Ramsay from Natural Order Supply. Hey, thanks for coming, Dan. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Chip.
Oh, man, I tell you, in these COVID episodes, I'm able to talk to so many more people because, man, we're all just hanging out at home on the Zoom calls anyway, huh?
Yeah, there's a lot more those talks just, one-to-one, but not in face, or a bunch of screens at once.
Pretty much had to turn off all my video. Audio seems to work for us here at the Real Dirt Studios, but the Zoom videos haven't gone so well. I apologize for any fans out there, any listeners who also have felt the poor quality of production, and we're going to try to pick up that. Hey, we're kind of starting it today here with Dan. Dan is a leader in the hemp and cannabis supply industry. He operates a supply store in Grand Junction, Colorado, the Natural Order Supply. And even though Dan sells stuff for all things growing, Dan, you've been focusing on hemp the past several years.
That is correct. It's definitely been our niche and kind of the specialty where we feel like we've been able to follow in with a little bit of luck of time and location with just being out here located in Grand Junction, Colorado. There's been a lot of hemp since 2015 out here.
And Grand Junction has one of the best climates for growing outdoor cannabis in Colorado.
It's really a nice location, just right up from us here in Mesa County. We've got Palisade, which is Colorado's wine country. And, Grand Junction's always at kind of the top for the most registered farms in the state or in the country, especially when you look at the counties surrounding us out here between Delta and Garfield County. It's been a good place to find hemp farmers in a country that had them for so long.
Dan, how'd you get involved with hemp?
So, we launched Natural Order Supply from a company called 3C Consulting, and then working with some cannabis investors called Green Lion Partners. We launched Natural Order Supply, which I took over, operations of in 2015. And the first employee I got in Natural Order Supply was the first registered hemp farm out here in the area. So we started talking hemp when there wasn't, no one had closed a sale yet, just the idea of the excitement. And as, the years went on, it seemed like, given that like Grand Junction being in Colorado, there's a moratorium on high THC. So we don't have any medical or adult use cannabis stores in Grand Junction. So I think it might have been a hotspot given the good climate, the land available, and kind of the lack of other cannabis entrepreneurial opportunities that might have just kind of made it a little hotspot. So pretty quickly, with my goal focusing on wanting to sell to businesses and to farms, there was rumor in 2015 that some of those marijuana entities were coming kind of towards our side of the slope, but we kind of shut down at that time. Every year as it grew, I found this niche in this new community, and I love the agricultural part of it and, that combination of what we've learned from growing in closets and how it translates to growing outdoors.
Yeah, that side of the state is really responsible for a lot of the hemp genetics that are around the country right now. I mean, I believe the wife came from that area. Cherry blossom, all of that stuff came from over there, right?
Yep, we see a lot of that. And it's like Abacus has been around here for a long time. And it's always interesting, though, to see some of those genetics in other parts of the state, in the country, moreover. But then it's back in expo days, as we travel a little more, it seems like there's so many varieties. It's amazing how each state can find their own little set of new names or different varieties so quickly in this industry. But it is fun to see that some of these original base genetics have really made it throughout the country and being grown in different geographic regions and seeing how they're doing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. I see the cherry and the wife all over. I see it in Maine. I see it in Vermont. I see it in Oregon. I see it Tennessee, Kentucky. They were really the first to hit the market as high CBD hemp products. And over the years, people have been able to do, add on and interbreed with them and develop stuff for their local geography. I've never really liked the way the Colorado cherry or the wife grows. I like vigorous plants. They're a little delicate, but they grow really well for Colorado. They grow really well for Oklahoma and windy areas. They're smaller plants. When people look at an individual plant, they're like, oh man, what's that plant? But like you look at a field of it, and it's a totally different story.
And looking at those genetics, whether they get bigger, kind of stay kind of short and stocky on some of those, we're really just harvesting has become such a thing too, like some of those, I love huge
totally.
plants. I love it when they set the hammock between plants. Boy, sometimes harvesting them takes a little while. And when you're looking at 50 acres, 100 acres, all of a sudden and trying to get something that can be standardized and mechanized, it's always easier said than done with genetic choice at this stage of the game, which is how reliable we see those genetics in the field, and especially since kind of seeds came to town. It was 2016, 17, even 18. It was really the clone wars. And, we did a lot of discussion and sales around bulk clones and how to be in more of a nursery than just a grow in a lot of sense. Because when all of a sudden you're starting 10,000, 100,000, million plus plants, which we've worked with, clients who've done all those numbers. And it's, there's just a lot more to consider as you start scaling up, from everything about like operational approach to costs. But then you get them out into the field, and those clones seem to be pretty consistent. So some of those first fields, I thought we saw more of that predictable growth out there versus, in the last year or so after the Farm Bill passed in 2018. Last year was like seeds were king. There's a handful of people doing, at least where we are, just because I think the labor, the operational costs, the uniformity of timing and everything, seeds make sense, but the stability of them is
still in process, still in development.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have many projects, many business projects. Another project I was just to launch this year, but due to COVID and the hemp industry, we haven't quite launched it yet, is a certified seed bank. And it's a seed bank that we've done the prep work ahead of time and certified that all of our vendors have quality product. Because this was a story we heard from people over and over and over and over and over again, that like they got hermaphrodite seeds. They bought all feminized seeds, but half of them were male, or a chunk of them were male, or the phenotypes were all over the place, or they didn't perform, or they had high THC in them, or no THC, or no CBD, or whatever the problem was. And we saw a need in the marketplace. But man, federal hemp bill last year really kind of flooded the market. And then COVID hit here. We just haven't really launched that business yet. I'm going to put it off till next year. COVID and the overproduction in our marketplace. How's that affected you guys?
I wish I could be more like optimistic instead of realistic about what happened.
Oh, this is the real part, man. You got to give it real.
Yeah, for sure. I tell you what, last fall, that flooded market, it started flooding and it came pretty hard, that all of a sudden these clients, most of the clients in 2019, 18, 17, a lot of that product was sold before January. And, we were planning, and I was working with clients about their new plans for the next year, almost pre-January, just a little bit in December, and then we'd hit the ground running at the new year. But last year, it got flooded, and I think there's multiple reasons. We just grew so much, was grown, like so many acres. When I went to the Texas Hemp Convention this spring, I couldn't walk to another booth and not just be like the amount of flower that was for sale and the amount of biomass that everybody, whereas at a lot of those industries trade shows in just a year or two back, you'd walk in and finding people who had raw product for sale in one form or another was a step into the industry. And now it was just like, you could walk 10 booths in a row and have 10 comparisons, and everybody's kind of like racing to the bottom or telling you why they're the best. Just not a whole lot of sales. And then once that, I think a lot of people, being that it's a young industry and it's ag, we just kind of sat there and were like, hold on, it'll recover. And that moment of like, just watch the market, which, is probably a good idea for your company at the moment for 2020, is just watching and seeing and learning. So February seemed like it was a pretty, it was hard to make sales. I didn't know a whole lot of clients who were making sales. And a lot of times we're already planning commercial farms at that point with people, and they were wanting to plan. And so we saw a pretty big industry shift, I think, of farmers who stepped out this spring and didn't replant. And then on that same aspect, all of our propagators who do seed production or do clone sales, they just got to that point where they were like, don't worry, sales are going to catch us, because there's been some pretty good money made in propagation in the last few years. In hemp for sure, just selling clones and selling them back east and selling them in state. And it's a pretty lucrative part of the industry too, if you can get that niche. But then this year, just the amount of new farms, there were only a few new farms. Last year, Colorado went from having just under 1,000 farms at the turn of the year to having 2,700 registered farmers, 17 new farmers that came, if not more, considering the few that had dropped out the year before. But this year, I think everybody when COVID hit, everybody who was on the fence to replant or to start a new farm kind of just got conservative. It was like, I'm going to hold my money. I'm just going to sit back and not do this. So, I think a lot of farmers that I'm working with right now had genetics going into this year. There wasn't as much of a genetic sourcing as there would be in an average spring of people stepping into the industry.
Well, so many people just lost their ass too last year and were on the fence, man. Because, literally, we saw the prices go from the high point of 2019 at $50 a pound for biomass, all the way down to I had someone say they'd take $1 a pound in January of this year, and they had 1 million pounds.
Those 1 million pounders, though. The issue was they went to the larger extractors, and the extractors were like, sure, we'll take 1 million pounds. And then all these smaller farmers that had been going to some of these larger ones all of a sudden didn't have that outlet where they're like, hey, at least we could go to them. They don't always give us the best price, but we could. That outlet has been there for the last couple of years from at least the bigger extractors out here on the Western Slope have been able to buy local for the years previous, right. But then having these, all of a sudden someone's like, I produced 1 million pounds. Nobody produced 1 million pounds in 2018. Or if they did, they were on the slide. But the idea that just kind of then turns the market. So when somebody's saying, hey, I'm not only going to sell this for $1 a pound, I'm going to take over the sales that, would often have reached 50 smaller farmers, even, you know what I'm saying? Or something to that nature.
Oh, yeah. And it was the federal legalization of it, the farm bill, that brought some really professional farmers. And at the same time, a lot of hemp farmers just hit their stride, kind of all at the same time. It was really a perfect storm.
It was. And, when you look at agriculture, in Colorado, we are definitely cannabinoid terpene farmers, we just don't have that infrastructure for grain or fiber. Just like when you look at going to California or, a heavy agricultural state where they're like, oh, we're just going to do a couple, 700 acres. And like, well, 700 acres and 250 acres in an unestablished market that's a lot to produce. Even if you have a lot of it not work out perfectly and you learn lessons, you're still going to end up with a lot of product to move in a young industry. It's an interesting industry because hemp's unlike high THC cannabis. It's like an open market. You can sell it anywhere, you can sell it in gas stations, grocery stores. If you can find those outlets, you can sell it anywhere. And whereas marijuana, that fact that what you produce has to be sold in state in these stores, it keeps it kind of sexy, kind of elusive. And all of a sudden you have to go there to get it. And when you get it, hopefully your bud tender tells you the right thing, and helps push you in the right area so that you get what's going to be the effect you're looking for. As soon as all of a sudden CBD was in every gas station, I was making the joke. They're like, hey, you guys sell CBD here? And they're like, it's next to the Mountain Dew. All of a sudden, even the retail outlets inadvertently kind of sell down the value of it. Not meaning to, but just by the lack of education and presentation for a new market that's trying to establish itself, I think, as far as CBD goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, listen, Dan, this is a perfect place for us to take a break. When we come back, we talked about the farmers and the supply side. I want to talk about what's going on within the consumable sides of CBD and hemp. Hey, this is Chip from The Real Dirt. I'm always starting new businesses. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm a little addicted to it. And I want to tell you about a new project I've got, Greener Consulting Group. We see so many consultants throughout the industry, and some of them know what they're doing and some of them don't. But almost no matter what it is, they have one specialty, and they might not have the specialty you need. At Greener Consulting Group, we're a conglomerate of many different consultants all over the country. We have specialties from extraction to municipal advisement to venture capital. We kind of have somebody who's an expert in the industry that can talk to you about whatever your problem. And, mostly we can solve that problem in just a day or two. So, hey, if you got some time, check us out, greenerconsultinggroup.com. Look us up on LinkedIn and Facebook. And hey, while you're out there, you might as well sign up for The Real Dirt on iTunes. Please subscribe That's how we get bigger, is when you subscribe. Hey, Dan, all of this overproduction on the biomass side, on the flower side of it, how, from your perspective, have you seen it affect the end-use products, the tinctures, the edibles, the tinctures, the soaps, the shampoos? Is that market increased any?
It's luckily that it doesn't seem to fluctuate as much from the price fluctuation we've seen. As this year's continued, we've seen quite a few of those tinctures and topicals and things at least go down a little bit in price to the end consumer. It's always
much,
not much, it's a good place to be. And I think that's where there's like a little bit of longevity for the smaller or the larger companies that are vertically integrated so that they can actually be getting revenue on the pounds they grow once it's like turned into a product.
You mean for farmers to make an added value product?
I'm saying for farmers and just the whole company as a general. Once you farm it and you like extract it in-house and you have a branded product you can get on the shelf, then all of a sudden there's a little embodied margin there for both the farmer, the extractor, and that retailer, it all because it works together. So I do think it's going to be separated a little bit more just because so much of the industry has been weeded out right now, for a better word to say. But I also think that like people are starting to tone down a little bit of the silliness with the inconsumable products. Maybe I'm wrong, but some of those sillinesses, it just seems like I've got a package of like CBD macaroni and cheese. And you're like, who are these people? Like where that was. And it seemed like in 2017, if you could think it up and put it into it, CBD had a little bit of an MSG phase there.
I have friends with CBD toothpaste and CBD shampoo. They previously made shampoo and toothpaste.
And that helps because they already know this niche market. I think that knowing a real niche in CBD is the key. To be like, we sell tinctures that help people who don't feel good is rough. To be like, hey, we work with athletes. We work with toothpaste and people who have mouth, and like, where does CBD fit in the dental industry? It's a niche community and you find the right people there. It can thrive there, I think. But I think a lot of the companies that came out trying to define their voice and being general have just had a hard time being, in like a CBD shop, just another tincture on the wall, right? Use a square bottle.
And that's one of the downfalls to the whole industry, too, is that in high THC cannabis and in medical marijuana, medical cannabis, adult use cannabis, a lot of it's vertically integrated. And if it's not vertically integrated, it's in this tight community because you have to have a license of a difficult license in most states other than Oklahoma, where hemp is harder to grow here than high THC cannabis. It's allowed a bunch of co-packers and white label people to come into the marketplace. And that in itself is just like homogenized the marketplace. The same guys making all the tinctures, the same guys making all the edibles, the same guys making all the gummies. And, how are you going to differentiate yourself when you're making the same gummy as a guy across the street, right? You got the same supply chain as a guy across the street. And I think that's been one of the like downfalls of the industry. Even though it's so many people start and progress, I think a lot of those people are going to fall out right now because they were co-packers of other products and they hopped on the CBD make a billion bandwagon. I think we're going to see a resurgence. I think we're going to see more on-farm products, more specifically made products, like you said, more engineered niche products. That's the industry maturing.
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a minute where a couple of these companies saw that accelerated growth and pretty quickly were like, hey, we can crank out, they want so much once they build a brand and they're an established company that the ability to white label just seemed like the next step.
No
so all of a sudden we went from being like just a couple white labelers till it's like, MJ BizCon last year was like, you can white label anything, and have a business just like the one 3 booths down. And I think that, like you said, the market's going to mature quite a bit this year over having some hardships. And we'll see people who are in the industry for real. And when we look at some of those cottage industries, more like craft beer or something and farm raised, I've got a company here I work with called Colorado Biodynamics that has a coffee shop in Palisade where they have a consumption lounge. They've gathered their couple products, but, smokable flower and their topicals, and they do all these things that are related there. So it really has a niche and the feelings that, it's all interconnected real nicely. And you see that kind of craft feel and mentality that you get, back in the day from craft beer.
Sure. Something that we haven't been able to get with craft cannabis or craft high THC cannabis. It's interesting. Well, one, it's always interesting to me how there's so much division over hemp versus high THC. I see it as all one plant. And I know it's hard, but wow, man, hemp has really led the way for high THC in so many ways. And, the products, the consumption lounges, man, the commercial agriculture, the use of plastic culture, the use of aerial spraying with drones, like all that's happened with hemp first instead of high THC.
Hemp's going to really look at that economies of scale. And as things get bigger, it's like, how do you really turn this in? And the fact that hemp has all these uses, that will eventually come from the plant. THC, they're niche. They know exactly what they're doing. They're in these niche stores that still have a pretty nice. So I think when we see federal legalization, we'll see a lot more of these practices from hemp adding to marijuana, but a lot of that has to do with regulations, I think a lot of people in marijuana would like to do some types of cultivations that we see with hemp, but based on the square footage they can have, the plants they can have, and state by state, it's just enough that there's no standard. And so once we see that kind of almost race to the bottom of cultivation of what people can do with smokable flower, I project that we'll see a lot of those same strategies just being implemented right into that high THC platform as well.
Yeah, we spoke about Oklahoma. Oklahoma's one of the only places in the country that you can scale and grow high THC cannabis in the same way that we're seeing people grow hemp. One license, one easy set of regulations, and you can literally grow as much as you want. It's been a testament to how much we've been restricted over research and development. Because, man, like in Colorado, you can only plant so many plants. You can only have so many plants.
And metric knows.
And metric knows. I mean, we literally just planted 9,500 seeds, 12 different high THC cannabis varieties the other day. And we're pheno tracking and keeping track of all of this stuff. But there's no regulations that say we can't do it. And a portion of these seeds, I know they're not going to make it. I'm just growing them for R&D purposes. And in other states, that would be so difficult to do because tracking, keeping, destroying them. People think that you were, trying to sell them on the private market. But here, just the way that they've approached it is just really good for high THC cannabis. We're able to do all this R&D. I want to get to some pivot stuff down here. Tons and tons of hoop houses, like field grown, like acres. Like you can do all of that here. And you can't do it with hemp here. It's the odd thing.
As soon as you step out and you start really getting those acres, though, we get that whole new, controlled, uncontrolled environment. Things that have come out here from, pests we haven't seen because hemp hasn't been planted in a while to, out in Palisade last year, if you did there's a little wine tour bike loop. If you were to ride your bike around, you'd see 20 different fields and how much it got seeded out. A lot of people lost, even when we talk about more factors that kind of made 2019 painful for the hemp industry come that harvest was how many harvests I know that were seeded out even before the early frost. Yeah, stepping outside and all of a sudden getting into, the hoop houses. But once you start planting acres on pivots, there's a whole little new set of approaches that need to come in to each one of those stages where we've been able to give the plant time and energy that it will take all your time and energy if you don't plant it right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We've got about an acre under plastic culture. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, you may have seen it. We call it plastic culture, and it's an implement that you run on a tractor, and it creates a bed out of natural soil. And then it'll lay down some fertilizer, your irrigation line, and then wrap it in this really thin layer of plastic that acts as a mulch. It's incredibly effective for planting vegetables and weed abatement. It's how tons of organic foods and vegetables are grown. It really helps with water conservation. I was just in this field this morning and we were, just doing some it's only an acre. So we're doing lightly staking it up, in a trellising wine vineyard type of style, something that you couldn't do in 20 acres. But in an acre, I can do it. But as I'm walking through it, I'm thinking about it's time for all of these leaves to be picked off. And it's dude, there's no way that's going to happen. And there's no way that I'm going to send people out here to de-leaf. No way I'm sending people out to bottom anything.
weeding has been a big thing because, people love growing these monster plants and, put them on huge centers. But then all of a sudden, while you're waiting for that plant to like cover that area, you just see weeds take over, with your beds, you might have more isolated watering, which is great for lots of reasons, but still just that weeding. And then also, I've actually been talking with people who are trying to figure out some of the answers to like trellising some of these larger fields with a different way of trellising, just because of like out here, it's like the wind. Because as soon as you're at the mercy of the weather, you're like, oh man, it just needs a stake. Like you're saying, like it needs a little help because you can do so much work, but then it gets to the end where it's got all that weight you want on it, but that fall weather's for real most places.
Yeah, here in Oklahoma, it's a diverse weather system. The wind is no joke. That's for sure. You either have to like plant, your canopy density has to be like incredibly thick in order to guard against the wind, because the wind will self-prune the plants and keep them smaller here for sure. But if you don't wire them up, string them up, stake them up in some way, like last year we had a half-acre field that was literally all growing sideways. It's just growing sideways.
I was at a farm, a client just the other day where there were a couple bigger plants that had like ripped up just like the side of the roots, and you're like burying them and you're like, oh, this isn't good. But it's like, once you start seeing that, you're like, how does it recover? This isn't the time we wanted stress, but like, yeah, it's like pulling them off. That's kind of the next, as we step outdoors, starting to say like, wait, maybe a little bit smaller plant, maybe an autoflower, maybe more densely populated, what's going to get that raw plant matter per cubic foot type thing or square foot. And as we kind of start realizing some of these areas that it's got to take some trial and error. So it's good to hear like in Oklahoma that they've created an area that's with less regulation and has more ability for that R&D to get out there, at least just from a knowledge standpoint of, what's going to be effective here. Because I can't tell you how many people last year also had a curly beet top virus, came through. And we worked with the extension office here at like CSU and with so many clients, just trying to identify some of these new diseases that we hadn't seen or what we thought it was, and thought it was a tobacco mosaic virus, thought it was, and you walk down through these and then to the end and you're like, well, and I've seen some, where it's like, it's now hemp mosaic virus. You're like, oh, so it's similar, but they're just things we haven't seen. And it's just such a different approach from growing in a controlled environment.
Kind of the beauty of it all, though, man, is hemp and cannabis is a new frontier for farming right now. The ability to be able to do research in the area or develop technology, it's right now is the time for all of that.
I always like to say that the learning for agriculture started in 10,000 BC. So we've been learning for a long time, all, but like education and transformation of knowledge was so slow, right? Every year it slowly got faster until all of a sudden we got to, as we continued in the 19th century early on to just like keep pushing hemp aside and marijuana aside, it was like we pushed cannabis out right when technology was really coming in. So now being able to take all this technology we've learned in the last 5 decades and start saying, wait, how do we apply this with what we know? We don't have to jump all the way back. We can jump right forward with a lot of I think one of the things I really enjoy about this industry is that classic, what we can learn from other industries.
So many aha moments. It's a great place, man. It's definitely not boring, that's for sure. What do you predict is going to happen here this year with the hemp industry? I mean, so many people haven't planted that had in the previous. Some big people planted this year. Some small people did. How do you see what's going on with current cultivation throughout the country? And how do you think it's going to affect the market?
So I know in Colorado, as you said, quite a few people who lost their ass, man, and got out of the game.
Yeah.
I would predict that we have, a good half of the market that grew last year in Colorado isn't growing this year. And those who were thought they were going to blow it up and do, hundreds of acres are doing 50 acres. And people who were doing everybody toned way back instead of, and was like, we're going to focus on quality instead of quantity. My big question as far as that is how much reserves do we have as far as biomass, oil, flour that's stored in a way that it still has, it's all viable so that the market, once harvest gets here in a couple months, most of that biomass, I think, is kind of, depending how it was stored, I think there's going to be a bad taste in the mouth for 2019 hemp even. And sometimes people make decisions with feelings more than they do, Given that I'm in here, I'd like to project that, 2021, we'll see a completely different situation because we will have like moved through a lot of that inventory. And the people who are around are people who aren't here by accident.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. It's going to mature the market for sure. It has already like pushed out the get rich quickers.
Completely. And the people who are like willing to put in the hustle work and find a way when you can't. It's kind of one of those, if you can sell in this market, if the water goes up a little bit, you'll know how to swim, I think there's a lot of potential here. The market's there, those end products are still selling. I just think that like we literally overproduced, whether it was 1 year or like a year and a half or where.
Most people can't store the product like you were saying. Most people think that they were like, oh, just hold on to it. I'll hold on to it. I'll hold on to it. But like the product degrades. And some of them out there still think they're going to sell their product from last year.
And we used to be able to do, in the good old days, you do more splits.
For our audience here, splits are a term we use for co-processors or toll processors, where you'll split a percentage of the end product and you provide the biomass. It may be a 50-50 split. It may be a 60-40 split. It may be a 70-30 split. You may be making crude oil, or you may be making distillate or isolate or whatever on this split. But basically, I would give my product to an extractor and they just give me back a portion of it in extracted material.
Exactly. Well said. But that was a common move, right? Like in the industry here was that people would get their product and be like, oh, we're going to do this split because, when you get, especially as a farmer, if you get one paycheck a year, it's pretty run down by the time you get back to October again. And so like shelling out capital to be able to process your material is not something that people who can't sell it, the idea that they're going to invest more money into this business that they've already found unsuccessful. I think a lot of that material is going to go by the wayside. I know lots of people who are like, oh, I have a storage shed, with 20,000 pounds of hemp. And you're like, oh, okay. But like in 2000, but at that point, and then I think it's going to mature. And, the cannabis industry is always one that loves being your due diligence from a business standpoint. So, as we have more established growers who have more established supply chains that can show that, and a more established story that fits the end products, desire for whatever it is they're aiming for, those niches will be defined. And I don't think people are going to walk back in time as much as to buy that old inventory unless they're. But I could be wrong. There's a couple companies out there that are happy to make shit products and just sell them. But I hope
or if you got the technology, and you can afford it, because that is the thing. But like the more the biomass degrades, the less material you get out of it in the long run, the less extractable material. So the harder it is for people to make money on it or make the extraction worth their while. Now it's August. I mean, all the early stuff, all of the auto flower stuff, it's starting to come out right now. Like in the all over the country in the next 2 months, like harvest is here.
Yep. I've got clients harvesting this week for autos, and, they're sitting on product from last year too, but only a few of them, a lot of them. And as I say that, the last month has been good for a lot of the clients I've talked to who have been able to move products that have stayed in here, who are probably not as much biomass, but people moving like smokable flower, moving oil. Delta 8, so hot right now. That's so hot right now. That's Delta 8.
That's a sticky wicket, but it is. That's for sure.
It is. Yeah. But it's just like it kind of, and the cannabis industry, I sometimes say, is a bunch of early adopters, like the whole industry is. Like we're all early adopters of the industry, even our users. So as soon as we come up with a new technology or a cannabinoid, CBG, like I'm interested to see how much CBG is harvested this fall, because I know a lot of people that
I think they planted it out. Interestingly, we planted out a bunch of autos for extraction this year, and we just got our first extraction results. And this is a butane extraction method. It's for the medical market, but we've got 7% CBG in our extracted product. Something we're like totally surprised at. The seed producer that gave it to us, I don't think they knew, or they didn't mention it to me. Right.
Yeah.
But we saw 19% in the flower that came out of the field, and then that turned into an extracted 69%. The CBG was, up at 7.68%. Pretty surprised and impressed.
There's a niche market for that, The high pH side, that's great. On the hemp side, the CBG is attractive because a lot of those CBG strains don't spike the THC as much. And then there's some regulation coming in this supposedly from the government in November about the way that THC is going to be kind of measured on a national level. So, when we're back in good old expo days, I feel, which seems like years ago, but with, January, December, there's a real big talk about do you really want to grow, these strains that could be a little higher with that risk for getting that cannabinoid content, and just how it's going to be enforced and interpreted.
Oh, it's all just started, man. The terpenes, the different cannabinoids. I mean, we're talking about Delta 8 THC right now that's extracted from hemp. And, most people are familiar with Delta 9. And there's just so much research to be had in the coming years. It's just really exciting. And, necessity is the mother of invention. And part of the necessity is farmers trying to figure out how they can have that special edge, that special niche, and be able to be successful in the marketplace.
Completely. And both the farmers and the market defining itself and consumers defining what they want. But like I said, I think a lot of it's just early adopters. Everybody's like, oh, cool. I'm into it. Right.
So can you make a price prediction on price per pound this year?
I think I'll shy away from that one.
Tell me what you thought the low of the price per pound last year was.
I saw people selling for I didn't hear that dollar, but $10 a pound was pretty common. And I heard people selling for $7 and stuff. A lot of that's the price per point of CBD.
Explain that. Let's talk about that. Explain what that means.
So if you grow a pound of hemp, we test it and it has 10% CBD content, we pay $1 per point because when we extracted the CBD is what we're after. So that would be $10 per pound. So if you grew
for the molecule,
a plant, per the molecule. And you can get a little bit more technical, but that's for the most part the best way to realize that not all hemp's grown equally. Sometimes people are I have a 15%, I have an 18%. And so much of what out here, in Colorado, I've seen just a lot more people who are doing, biomass and extraction, also really trying to leverage their greenhouses for flower and that, believing in that smokable flower market, which is, I've seen $100 a pound up to, $450. Seven. Yep, 7. I mean, they go all the way up there. The people I know who have been able to sell 7 and those larger ones have established relationships.
Primo. Smokable flower.
It is. And that primo, hemp is becoming a real thing, getting that next quality. Cannabis, the cannabis industry has got a lot of pot snobs in it. That quality is really important. It surprises me to have people being I want to evaluate putting, LEDs in my hoop house to, for this hemp. And you're we just want to get every little, just trying to explore the different capital costs to get every little inch closer they can to being on the toppest shelf.
That's cannabis in a nutshell, man. People, ganja farmers, cannabis farmers throughout the known universe all have incredible pride in what they do. And sometimes their egos get in the way. Our egos get in the way, I'll say. And, sometimes you'll find those really hidden gems that are just incredible. Word to the wise, when you see those people with really great cannabis skills, just shut up and listen, man. Take some advice in and really listen and see what they're doing and check the ego a little bit at the door. You'll learn a lot, man. You'll grow better.
For sure. That's one of the things, quite a few clients that'll come to me because we do a lot of product evaluations and just little cost benefit analysis stuff for clients. And when they come in and we all want to find that quick fix, will the LEDs increase my yield and make it that much better? I'm well, not if you mess up the other parts. Whenever you're growing and you meet somebody who's done it well, you better take pride in it because a controlled environment, it's biomimicry. You're mimicking the earth. There's a lot going on here between the temperature, the air, and all of it's changing and dynamic as the plants grow into the humidity at every part of it. And so to be able to move with a plant through the phase and control those variables in the way you want to, you probably should shut up and listen to that person,
Oh, yeah, man. It's so simple. There's only 4 pieces of magic that make cannabis grow, and that are genetics, water, soil, and sun. Pretty much you can manipulate those in many, many ways, but those are the 4 things you have to have.
You need some CO2 in there too. Get that photosynthesis just by the equation.
Sure.
Not tons. I'm not saying you
Sure.
need to like augment it. I'm just saying like in the like have to happen though.
You gotta have, it's plants gotta
You got it.
photosynthesize
You
for
got, it's
sure.
got it. But,
Right,
and whether you augment
right.
the CO2 or not, but no, like you're saying, there's only these
Variable.
5 kind of like, variables or constraints of sorts. But what's fun about growing is like the plant grows every day. And the bigger the roots, the bigger it grows next day. And it grows exponentially. And like, how does that change what you did last week? And so, asking those, and we've got a digital solution we're working on with that we'll be bringing out here soon with like an app that we're building to try to answer a lot of these questions. But that'll be next year.
Great.
We'll have to hop on and chat again, about that. But I love those questions. I think that's a really fun part of the growing is the fact that you're like, it's really simple. You're like, yeah, until it changes every day.
Yeah, Dan, one of the things that you guys are doing a lot of is education. And you just brought up this app. What we haven't talked about is like your education outreach and, what your plans are in the future for that. Tell me about that, man.
Yeah. So as a company, as a person, my ethos has always been real education based, in this industry. Tons of it's needed. Last year, as a company, started a monthly event we call Here for Hemp. That was just real hemp centric events that we did monthly, where we brought everybody from like the Department of Agriculture to talk about their hemp, what they do when they do a walkthrough. It's like talk about pest control. Or we also brought in like, just parts of the industry of people from like the banking, the insurance side, all those business components that are needed. Because just because you started a farm, that's you need the whole business behind it as well. And there's so much that can be, gleaned and learned and needs to be done there. So we did that, all the way up until this last February, when COVID decided like no more events. And, but those were in-person events where we had, the last one we did in February was a CHAMP event. So that's like Colorado's Hemp Advancement Management Plan. But that one, you could actually see a recording of that one on our YouTube page at Natural Order Supply or at I believe it's posted on the Colorado Department of Agriculture's like note sites, for when they came in and kind of talked a lot about just the process of transport. How do you register? That was a big question actually this last year was, when they pull you over, how do you be like, here's my form that says this is what it is, and people believe you? And how does that work when you drive around Colorado to leave Colorado? So we like, as much as we love the cultivation and the plant, we see the bigger industry as what we're aiming to really make our impact in. So starting in September, we're going to start doing our Here for Hemp events again with a webinar series. We're going to have 10 different cannabis professionals or the professionals from Grand Junction, because we work a lot with it. We've worked with like the economic department there and different, like sometimes it's good to get somebody from the fire department to come in, or, depending on what the conversation is, we really like to talk about to those city officials and regulators. But we'll be doing probably a 10-minute local webinar held in our store with 10-person events, since that's about as big as you can blow up events right now. And then having a webinar where we'll be inviting people, such as, like I said, regulators and educators, where people will be able to hop on in and join and see both those webinars, which will be posted to our YouTube site, but also if they wanted to be able to hop in and join the conversation or apply to come and hang out as one of the 10 people in the store and get some swag,
We'd love to help you out with that. Real Dirt has really tried to push many of our interviewees, webinars, and educational programs. And the only way that we're really going to do better at this cannabis thing, this cannabis life, is to educate ourselves and others about it. Yeah, definitely let's work together and help you get that information out more.
Yeah, that'd be great, Chip. We appreciate anything we can. It's amazing what you can learn with the World Wide Web, too, when you jump in from a different place. And, I've been hopping on webinars left and right and forgetting about them, too. I think the nature of the COVID world, it's like I sign up on my calendar, but it's just so different than the expo world that, I think we're used to in the networking for a company like ours who used to go have booths and, do quite a few shows.
All changing.
Exactly.
Well, Dan, it's been awesome speaking to you today about hemp, the future of hemp, and what's going on with you guys over at Natural Order Supply in Grand Junction. Hey, if our listeners want to get in touch with you or research you more, how do they do that?
It's pretty straightforward. We're at naturalordersupply.com. That's the same hook for our online, our social platforms, as well as Natural Order Supply, or And if you go to our website there, you'll see it's all hemp centric. There's an area in the top right button to click to join our next event on our website. Yeah, that's just the best way to reach us online is hit us on the website or search for us on social. And we're on all those platforms, sharing what we're learning, and we're real excited to step into pushing as much of our education that we have been keeping local digital this towards the end of this year and all of next year, really launching that.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, that's great, Dan. I hope we hear more from you. We want to definitely help you out with some of your webinars and education in the future. So listeners, look for more natural order solutions, natural order supply, webinar, hemp webinar with Dan Ramsay. Dan, thanks for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Chip. It's been great.
All right. This was A Real Dirt. Thanks, guys.